Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling negotiation, which, let's be honest, is something we all have to deal with, whether we like it or not, right?
It's the art of getting what you want, or at least closer to it.
Exactly. And to help us navigate this tricky terrain, we've got two awesome guides, one a classic, the other, well, a bit more of a curveball. We're looking at Getting to Yes. That's the one by the Harvard Negotiation Project, super influential.
Definitely a must-read.
And Never Split the Difference. Now, this one's by Chris Voss, former FBI hostage negotiator. Talk about high-stakes situations, right? Should make for a fascinating contrast, don't you think?
Absolutely. And you might be surprised, despite their different approaches, both books actually highlight how vital that human element is in negotiation. It's not just about logic and strategy. There's a whole emotional layer that often gets overlooked.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. Getting to yes. They really stress focusing on interests, not positions, right? Like it's not just about what you want, but why you want it. And understanding the other side's why is just as crucial. You know, like that example they give with the farmers and the oil company.
Oh, right, where the farmers were worried about the oil trucks damaging their crops.
Yeah.
The company initially was like, tough luck, we're allowed to be here. But by, digging a bit deeper, they uncovered that shared interest, the farmers' livelihoods.
Right. It wasn't about trucks, good or bad. It was about the impact on their ability to work.
Exactly. And, the oil company ended up tweaking their routes, even hired some of those farmers as drivers. A win-win for everyone involved.
See, and that's what's so cool. It seems so obvious in hindsight, right?
Yeah.
But we've all been there, stuck arguing our point instead of trying to understand the why behind someone else's stance. And this is where I think Voss's book adds this whole other layer with his whole concept of System 1 and System 2 thinking. Have you heard of this?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so for our listeners.
Yeah, so System 1, that's our emotional brain, right? It's reactive, it's fight or flight. Then there's System 2, that's our slower, more logical side. And Voss argues that even when we think we're being rational in a negotiation, a lot of times System 1 is the one calling the shots.
It's like those times you walk away from a negotiation and you're like, why did I do that?
Exactly. Like, remember that time you haggled for an hour over a souvenir, even though you knew it was 3 times the price it should have been?
Oh, all the time, especially on vacation when you're feeling carefree.
Exactly. That's System 1 craving that victory feeling, even if it means overpaying for a silly trinket.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
So it's like learning to recognize when we're being driven by those emotions is the first step to navigating someone else's.
Exactly. You've got to be aware of your own biases, your own triggers, to truly understand where the other person is coming from.
Which makes that whole getting to yes principle of separating the people from the problem even more crucial, right?
Precisely. Because if you're all caught up in the emotional baggage, it's way harder to find those win-win solutions.
It clouds your judgment for sure.
And that's where Voss's background, coming from that hostage negotiation world, I think he takes it a step further. He provides actual tactical things you can do to de-escalate those tense moments, build rapport. It's using emotional intelligence to your advantage.
So not suppressing emotions, but understanding and channeling them.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Because emotions are always at play, whether we acknowledge them or not.
And it seems like both books, they both really emphasize that active listening piece, right? Really trying to understand the other side's perspective. It's not just waiting for your turn to talk, but truly grasping their why.
Yeah, because to borrow a phrase from Getting to Yes, it's their thinking that's the problem.
Oh, I like that.
You need to understand that, not just their words, before you can even start to negotiate around it.
Okay, so we've got this foundation, right? Focusing on interests, managing emotions, truly listening. But what are some actual tactical things we can do during a negotiation?
Well, Voss, he has this kind of wild idea about the power of saying no, which seems, counterintuitive, right? Aren't we usually trying to get the other person to say yes?
Yeah, that's not usually how I think about it. I'm always aiming for that yes.
It does. But Voss, he argues that no, it can actually lead to a more collaborative negotiation.
Really?
Yeah. He uses this example of those yes pattern scripts they use in fundraising calls. They're designed to get you saying yes, 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 building you up to that donation.
Oh, yeah. I've totally fallen for those before. It's You don't even realize you're being led down this path.
Exactly. And what Voss found was those scripts, they were actually less effective in the long run. Yeah, people might have said yes to those early questions, but it was often a surface-level agreement.
They hadn't really bought in.
Exactly. So they're more likely to hit the brakes when that real ask comes,
So those early yeses almost create this false sense of progress.
Yeah, and it makes it even harder to get that final yes that actually matters, right?
Interesting.
And that's why Voss encourages negotiators to, like, actually create opportunities for the other side to say no.
Give them an out.
In a way, yeah, because it gives them that sense of control, that autonomy, which paradoxically can make them more receptive to your ideas later on.
It's like by giving them the freedom to disagree, you're actually making them more likely to agree.
Exactly. It's counterintuitive, but it works.
That's wild. And he also talks about this other tactic that seems so simple, but he says it's really effective, this thing called mirroring. Can you explain that a bit?
Oh, yeah. Mirroring is all about building rapport, right? It's tapping into that very human need for connection. And it's really simple. You just repeat the last few words someone says.
Oh, okay.
And it sounds so basic, but it works because it validates their feelings. It shows you're really listening. It creates that instant, hey, this person gets me feeling.
Right, like you're on the same wavelengths.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would be powerful, even subconsciously.
Oh, absolutely. And Voss, he even uses it in, like, hostage situations, right?
Wow, really?
Yeah, because it's incredibly effective for de-escalating those really tense, high-stakes moments.
Right, where emotions are running really high.
Exactly.
Wow. So to think that something that simple can have such a profound impact.
It's all about that human connection.
That's amazing. Now, while we're talking about, like, tactics, getting to yes, they also really emphasize the importance of using objective criteria in those negotiations.
Oh, absolutely.
So can you unpack that one a little bit?
Yeah. So instead of just, going back and forth based on what you're willing to do or what they're willing to do, you try to find some external standards to kind of like guide that agreement.
Right.
Things like market value, right? Expert opinions, legal precedents, industry benchmarks, anything that can help to depersonalize the negotiation and keeps it focused on fairness.
So it's less about like winning and more about finding a solution that's objectively reasonable.
Exactly. It's like you're both on the same team trying to find a solution that works within the rules of the game, whatever those rules might be.
Which actually ties in nicely with what we were just talking about with Voss and, creating that sense of fairness.
Exactly. It shows you're not just trying to pull a fast one. You're committed to finding a solution that works, that's fair for everyone.
Right. It builds trust.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean you can't be strategic.
Right.
And this is where Voss is, he's really big on this idea of uncovering those hidden dynamics, what he calls black swans, that can totally change the course of a negotiation.
Ooh, black swans. Okay, I love that term. It really highlights how important it is to be adaptable, to constantly be seeking out new information. But how do you even begin to uncover those hidden elements?
Well, Voss talks about the importance of asking what he calls calibrated questions.
Calibrated questions. Okay, so how do those work in practice? Got any examples?
So imagine you're trying to get a faster response from a company and they're like notorious for dragging their feet. Instead of saying like, hey, can you speed things up, which, invites that flat no, Voss might ask something like, how am I supposed to explain this delay to my team?
Ah, I see. So you're shifting the onus onto them a little bit.
Exactly.
You're making them almost grapple with the problem that it's causing you.
Exactly. They're forced to see the situation from your perspective and acknowledge hey, this delay is a real problem for this person. They can't just brush you off with a simple no.
Right. It's like you're not letting them off the hook with a simple answer.
Exactly. They have to engage with the issue.
That's brilliant. And it's like you're using questions to almost nudge them towards a solution that works for both of you rather than just issuing demands. And it reminds me of what we were talking about earlier, about really understanding the other side's perspective. It's not just about passively listening. It's about actively digging deeper.
Absolutely. And sometimes those hidden dynamics, they're about more than just individual motivations. Voss uses this really gripping example actually of a hostage situation where the negotiators, they missed a crucial black swan. They assumed that the hostage taker would eventually negotiate, based on past experiences. But it turned out this particular hostage taker, he was actually suicidal. Wow. Yeah, so their whole approach, it was completely off because they missed that key piece of information.
Wow, that's a chilling reminder of how high the stakes can be and how our assumptions can really blind us to what's actually happening, especially in those, emotionally charged situations.
Exactly. And that's why Voss, he stresses the importance of constantly challenging those assumptions, right? Like really looking for those telltale signs that something deeper might be at play.
So how do you train yourself to, spot those black swans? It seems like it would take years of, experience.
Well, Voss argues that everyone has the potential to develop this skill.
Okay, good.
Yeah. It starts with really being present in the moment, paying attention to both the verbal and the nonverbal cues, and being willing to question your initial assumptions. It's about cultivating a sense of curiosity, approaching each negotiation as a unique puzzle to be solved.
So shifting your mindset from I need to win this to I need to understand what's really going on here.
Exactly. And that curiosity, that's what can lead you to uncover those black swans, which can totally change your negotiation strategy, right? It's like you go in thinking you're just negotiating the price of a car, but you might discover that the seller, they're actually more motivated by getting rid of it quickly because they're moving across the country next week.
Oh, okay. That's a great point. So if you can uncover those hidden needs or motivations, you can tailor your approach to be much more effective.
Yeah.
It's like you said earlier, it's about creating those solutions that work for everyone involved. And speaking of finding those mutually beneficial solutions, both getting to yes and never split the difference, they both touch on this concept of leverage, but in sort of different ways. Where do you see the overlap?
Well, getting to yes talks about understanding the other side's needs and constraints, which is essentially about understanding their leverage points, right? If you know what matters to them, what their walkaway point is, you can negotiate much more effectively.
Right. What is their BTNA, their best alternative to a negotiated agreement?
Exactly.
If their alternative is better than what you're offering, you're probably not going to strike a deal.
Exactly. And that's where I think Voss's breakdown of different types of leverage comes in.
Okay, different types. So it's not just about who has the most power at the table. There's more nuance to it than that.
Way more. So Voss, he breaks it down into three types, right? Positive, negative, and normative. So positive leverage, that's about understanding what your counterpart wants, their goals, their dreams, and then finding ways to align your offer with those.
So it's not just about what you're willing to give, but also about how you frame it, how you make it resonate with their aspirations.
Exactly. Then there's negative leverage that's all about the consequences if they don't reach an agreement with you. Not threats necessarily, but more the downsides they face by walking away.
Okay, so positive is kind of what they gain, negative is what they stand to lose. What about normative leverage?
Okay, so normative leverage, that's where you tap into their values, their sense of what's right. Voss tells this, oh my gosh, this wild story about this tobacco farmer who, as a protest, drove his tractor into a pond in Washington, D.C. and was threatening to, blow himself up.
Wait, what? Okay, that escalated quickly. How did they even begin to, negotiate in that situation?
Well, the negotiators, they quickly realized threats weren't going to work. This guy was clearly driven by his convictions. But then one of the negotiators, she discovered he was deeply religious. So she framed surrender as this symbolic act. Tomorrow was the dawn of the third day, the day Christians believed Jesus rose from the dead.
Wow. So by understanding his beliefs, they were able to kind of appeal to his sense of faith, even in that extreme circumstances. They found a way to make surrender feel like a victory in his own worldview.
Exactly. And that's the power of understanding those hidden dynamics, those black swans, right? It's not always about what's on the surface.
This has been eye-opening, so much to think about. As we wrap up our deep dive into negotiation, any last words of wisdom? What's the most important thing for our listeners to remember as they head into their own negotiations, whether it's a salary discussion, a business deal, or even just haggling for a better price at the flea market?
Approach every negotiation with that curiosity, that empathy. Truly listen to understand that other side. What are their interests? What are their fears? What's their BATNA? That best alternative to a negotiated agreement we talked about. What's their walkaway point? What are they hoping to achieve? And don't be afraid to ask questions, even if they seem a little unorthodox, like those calibrated questions from Voss. The more information you have, the better equipped you'll be to find a solution that works for everyone.
It's like that saying, the person doing the talking is doing the learning.
Right, exactly.
And, remember, it's not about winning or losing. It's about finding that win-win where everyone feels good about the outcome.
It's about building those relationships, not burning bridges. And sometimes those most successful negotiations are the ones that, initially seemed impossible.
I love that it gives me hope for those times when a negotiation just feels stuck.
There's always a way forward.
So next time you find yourself face to face with a tough negotiation, remember what we've learned today, right? What are their interests? What are their fears? What questions can you ask to uncover those hidden dynamics, those black swans that might just unlock that creative, mutually beneficial solution? Until next time, happy negotiating, everyone.